we have a special guest here in studio with us. Joining us is Jacob Walda from the Bill Prankard Evangelistic Association. It's one of the ministry partners that, as a 700 Club Canada, you help to support. And he's here to share an update with us and tell us about his new book, A Timothy Generation. Welcome, Jacob. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're really here twofold. We're going to have quite a bit of time with you today. We're going to be talking about the Bill Prankard Association, and we're also going to be talking about your new book, A Timothy Generation.
Yeah.
But first, we've recently been able to help support you in the ministry on a new project, really building a Bible school in Northern Canada. So do you want to tell us more about that project and sort of the vision behind it?
Absolutely. Bill and I, a number of years ago, were talking, and suicide has been the big problem that we've seen. It's a plague across the Arctic. And we found one of the communities, it was the roughest, toughest kind of place. And we said together, we're going to pray and just pour into this community, because if God can do it there, he can do it anywhere. And we wanted to build faith in other communities, that if they could see it happen in the worst place. And so in this community, 2 years ago, they had just a community of 1,200 people. They had over 20 suicides. And the year before that, they had over 15. And it was devastating. And then this past year in 2023, they didn't have any. And up until September of this year, they didn't have one. And then in September, we had a suicide. But to go that long without one was massive for this community. And so we started seeing a shift happen. But what that put in our hearts was, if God can do it there, and we saw a whole year without suicide, then that's where we wanted to bring people to see what God was doing. And that was kind of the vision of launching a training center, was we didn't just want Inuit to come to the South to be trained. We wanted them to be in their communities, to minister to their people, and to learn from their own people how to minister to others.
I love that. So you're going to them rather than saying, hey, come here. I love that you're there. You're in the community that it's happening. And so how do you really envision the lives of those that are trained through the training school? How do you see them impacting their community and the communities around them?
Yeah. We've seen, one of the things that I've noticed in all of my travels, been to a handful of communities so far, is that there's leaders, just like in the South, leaders who are getting older, and another generation, it's kind of foreshadowing for my book later, but another generation who really doesn't know God. And there's a big gap between them. And so there's no future for church leadership. And so that's where, as our heart as a ministry, we wanted to step in to be like, we want to help train and equip and get them ready to not just, have Sunday service, but how do we pastor through suicides in a community? How do we, build apostolically? How do we, pour in with teachers and people who are gifted in each of those areas that Christ gave to the church? And how do we raise them up in their own communities like that?
That's amazing. So you've talked a bit about the rate of suicide. So do you have any stories or anything that you can share with us recently, how you've seen that community impacted for the best, really, when it comes to that?
Yeah, so same community that we've been talking about. I was there about 2 years ago, and we met this young man. He was 13 at the time, and we just had a gathering at the youth center. I brought a youth pastor with me, and my wife was there, and another girl that was on our team, and we just shared the love of God with this young man. And he looked like, in the movies where they have a big rain cloud over their head and they're gloomy and sad. He looked that way. And so we talked with him about Jesus, and he just got radically set free and delivered, and he gave his life to Jesus, and he got miraculously healed. He had a boot on his leg, broken ankle, and he was hobbling around on crutches and minus 25 through his community. And so we were talking to him at the airport, and I said to him, hey, when's the last time you left your community? Like, do you leave often? He said, yeah, I left in the summer. And I said, oh, how come? And he said he had attempted suicide at 13. And we've seen just a huge shift the last 2 years of walking with him. That's our goal with our ministry and teams, is to disciple them. And he's now leading a Bible study. He's the guy that's now checking in all of his friends, being like, hey, how are you doing? And how are you really doing, right? And actually asking the tough questions. So he's been one of many that we've seen just really grab a hold of what happens when the gospel is preached and when lives are changed.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's so good to hear those personal stories of people whose lives have been directly impacted by the work that you're doing. And I know the Bill Prankard Evangelistic Association works across the nation of Canada, and you and Bill travel quite a bit. So what is your vision or heart for the nation of Canada and more specifically for Northern Canada as well?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I did want to say a huge thank you from me and Bill to all of the partners of 700 Club
Mhm.
Canada, because we can't do this kind of stuff without our partners.
Yeah.
And so we are beyond thankful for everything. But I mean, what we're seeing and what we're longing for is kind of one and the same. Is there's a hunger in the nation, and we're seeing it from the saved and the unsaved. We've seen, like, my wife has friends who she went to high school with who saw the evil in the world,
Yeah.
and were like, there has to be good. And how do we get that? And then they found Jesus,
Mm.
right? So there's a hunger amongst both communities. And what we're just seeing is we want to pour into that. And we want to see people who are hungry be filled. The Bible says that. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst, for they shall be filled. And so we're just going after that. We just want to preach Jesus to everybody. We've partnered with, a handful of ministries to do stadium events, to have, church gatherings, to open air preaching at outdoor venues and everything in between.
Amazing. Well, Jacob, thank you for the work that you guys do. And I'm excited to really come back and be able to share about the message that you have
Yeah.
through A Timothy Generation. So we'll be right back with Jacob to talk more about his book. Welcome back. We're here with Jacob Walda, and we're going to be talking about his new book, A Timothy Generation. So there we go. And I just wanted to read a quote from page 12. It says, a lack of discipleship and mentorship between the generations. I truly see mending this deficiency as a solution to our national leadership crisis, our fatherlessness crisis, and our discipleship crisis in Canada. So that seems to really be a central theme to your book. So what inspired you to write A Timothy Generation, and how did sort of your personal experiences shape this message?
I mean, part of it was my relationship with Bill, right? Like, Bill and I were ministry partners, and we do stuff together. I'm his assistant, but we've also become friends. And we didn't know this, but we'd unintentionally been modeling something everywhere we went, where people are like, oh, you guys are, Bill's, at the later years, and I'm at the beginning of my ministry years. And they were like, how are you guys doing this? And we're like, well, that's just how it is. And then I read a quote, or I read a scripture, and it's in my first chapter. And it was in in Judges chapter 2. And it talks about how when the Israelites had come into the land and they'd settled and all that stuff, that generation who came in, the elders, passed away. Then there came a generation that neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. And so they went and worshiped other gods. And I looked at my generation like that, because there was a generation like Bill's who'd seen, the greats, the Catherine Colemans, the Benny Hinns, the Oral Roberts, and everyone in between. And then my generation who doesn't know anything. They don't really know who Jesus is. They don't know the real Jesus. They have a perception. And so I looked at it as, there's something that's missing. And to me, when we have mothers and fathers, because that was the model of Jesus, was discipleship.
Yeah.
And if it worked then, it will work now. And I see that as helping mend those gaps of things, because love is the motivator in all of those things. And that's what draws us together.
Yeah, I love that, because I mean, I was a discipleship pastor for many years. And so that is really a heart that I have as well, and seeing really that multi-generational living as well. So given the current state of the church and society, what makes the message of your book so relevant for today?
Yeah, I think when, like, in the church world and in the secular world, they're kind of the one and the same. My generation is just believing everything and anything that's out there. And we're passionate and we're zealous for whatever we're set our hearts on. And then the older generation was taught, a lot of certain things that were true and right, and morals and respect and things that our generation needs. So whether in the church or not in the church, there's values that we actually need from one another. But I think when I look at mine with the zeal and the passion, I think if we could fire up the older generation, because sometimes I found, like, I've traveled across the nation, sometimes the older people, they're getting tired. But if we could walk together, it was like, I explained it to Bill this way. When we had this older dog, and then we thought it was going to die, so we got a puppy. But the older dog came back to life. And for 3.5 years, it was like a puppy again. And so I said to Bill, kind of a bad analogy, but it fit, of like, that's what I saw, was just this new life in both of us. And so if we could do that, I think it would just benefit the church, and it would benefit every area of our nation.
Yeah, and we see that modeled in scripture, as you pull that out a lot within your book. And we see the importance of that, like you said, how it just brought life back into your other puppy. Well, So you've talked a bit about walking alongside Bill, who we know is a strong spiritual leader
Yeah.
in Canada. So how has that really shaped your understanding of discipleship? And let me throw this one in too. If there's someone who's watching who's like, I want to look for that
Yeah.
relationship, what would you say to them on how to maybe begin that journey?
Yeah. It the whole thing with Bill has really changed me and messed me up. And I think I talk about it in my book, but one of the stories that kind of brings us to life the most, I was at his house very early on, and Julie and I's first visit together as my wife. And I'd said some sarcastic remark to Julia. And Bill's making breakfast. He kind of threw the utensils in the sink and turns around and he goes, "Why'd you say that?" I said, "Well, I don't know." And he goes, "Well, why'd you say that to your wife?" But that was the first time anybody had ever really called me out in love
Mm.
in a manner that was like, "This is not right. Why are you doing that?" And at first it was a bit of shame, but then I was like, Bill loves me and my wife so much that he was willing to speak up and speak into us to help us to
Yeah.
become better. And that moment really changed me as a man in our marriage because I became so much more intentional that others can see. And not that I was doing it for others, but I want others to see that I love my wife and that I want to do well.
Yeah.
And I mean, as far as, pursuing it, I think it's kind of two things. The first is prayer, right? God knows who's best. But the other thing is there's so many people at churches and in gatherings of small groups. Go talk with them, right? And just find someone, be like, "I'd love to hear your story. Can I take you out for coffee? Can I, you got to you got to start somewhere." And I find coffee shops and Tim Hortons, McDonald's, great places to build those relationships.
Yeah, I was actually listening to something and they were talking about mentorship and they were saying if you're seeking out a mentor, like someone to mentor you,
Yeah.
the best posture to have is humility,
Mhm.
right? It's going, what can I learn from you? And actually even
Yeah.
approaching people
Yeah.
in that way. Hey, I'd love to take you out for coffee so I can hear from you.
Yeah.
And your book really talks about a lot of that within that relationship with you and Bill and
Mhm.
some of the personal stories that you did share in it. So what is your vision for the Timothy generation moving forward? Like, what do you hope the
Yeah.
message would speak to people right now?
It's not like I kind of label the generations, the Paul generation is the older one, the Timothy generation,
Yeah.
but it's not just written for young people.
Mm-hmm.
The heart of it is right now there's something wrong with the church. There's something wrong, and I'm not offering a solution in the sense of diagnosis. I'm offering a solution in the sense of if we walk together, we can figure the rest out. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that, like I said earlier, if my generation's zeal and passion could be funneled with the wisdom and experience that the older generation had, we would see so much more done
Yeah.
and done right. And then the older generation can be a part of what God is already doing and just a part of that. And they feel valued, they would feel loved. And I know so many older people who are just they alone and lonely.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
don't need to be that way. And it's not a knock to anybody, but it is we can do better.
Yeah.
And I want to see every generation walking hand in hand. I want to see every person thriving. And just quickly, I had this call with this lady. She was 92 years old and she's in a long-term care home in Brampton. And I called her and she met my hero, Smith Wigglesworth,
Mm.
when she was 8 years old and he prayed for her. And I talked to her on the phone for 20 minutes and she was so thankful that I spent time talking to her. She goes, "Thank you for taking the time." I was like, "Are you kidding? Like, do you know how much this blessed me?" And I think of that the same, like if my generation could hear about what God had done, it would stir up so much faith and
Yeah.
hunger for what God could do in our generation.
I love that. Well, thank you for writing this book. Thank
Mm,
you for all that you do, you and Bill, across this nation, and that we can be a part of that. And so, thank you as well for being here
Thank you.
today. If you want to know more about the Bill Prankard Evangelistic Association or Jacob's book, A Timothy Generation, you can go to 700club.ca.